India News. You're watching Global Chit Chat, our weekly show where we address the top developments in international politics with our guest and expert, Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini. Hello, sir. Welcome back to our show.
My pleasure. I'd like to wish you and the viewers a very happy new year.
Happy New Year, sir. So, sir, the top development that is being spoken about the most in recent times is the US is hoping to build on Iran nuclear talks, right? So, while we know that in the latest rounds of talks between the two countries, Iran stressed on US sanctions being lifted. So, do you think that any further dialogue between the two countries is going to pan out any differently, or it's going to be the same?
Okay. So, as we've been discussing earlier, the sticking points essentially are the same between the US and the Iran. The US demand is complete compliance to the 2015 agreement. And obviously, there is evidence to suggest that if you look at the level of uranium enrichment, Iran has increased it substantially way beyond what was allowed by the 2015 deal. So that is one part of it. Then, obviously, if you look at giving access to IAEA inspectors, to various sites in Iran, that was also a sticking point because in between Iran and said they would not be giving access. So this is what the US and the other E3 countries were objecting to. Apart from this, the problem for the US is not only that Iran wants the removal of all sanctions, it's also that Iran also wants the US and other signatories to give a commitment that in future the US will not pull out of the deal, any such deal as Donald Trump had done. Now, this is proving to be even tougher because through back channels, what appears is that because both Iran and many other countries have been saying that, there is a possibility of finding some sort of common ground. But this commitment is going to be tough. But then I think the Biden administration has, on a couple of other agreements, it has given similar assurances that in future, we're not going to sort of withdraw. So this is, I think, one important point which you need to say that because Biden does not even have significant political capital, because if he had that sort of political capital, by now he could have, even taken risks, as many believed, and he could have probably even removed all sanctions which had been imposed on Iran. Now, I think a possible sort of agreement, arrangement, which is which will be accepted by all, is that first of all, certain economic transactions which Iran is carrying out with other countries, that they should be given a go-ahead, especially in terms of the oil, because a lot of even countries which are close to the US depend upon Iran for their oil needs. So one is that part. The other is that the other assurance also which can be given is that in future, even if there is some problem with this agreement, all the economic transactions which Iran had gone in for with other countries, that they will not be disturbed in such a situation. So that's one part of it. Now, the other thing is you also need a clear appreciation of the types of sanctions, and also somebody who can actually, explain, articulate that what sort of arrangement you will have, for the sanctions. Because on the one hand, as far as Iran is concerned, you have a body, you have the IAEA, which actually says that these are the conditions, and this is whether that Iran has gone beyond this limit, or it's within the limits, or whatever else. But as for the sanctions, you don't have anybody to actually decide that, okay, that these are things which these are the low-hanging fruits, these are the things which are problematic. And as I said, in case of a US withdrawal, that this is what the sort of modus operandi which you can have. But what is interesting is, apart from just the negotiations between Iran and other signatories, there is an assessment by Israel which shows that Iran and the other signatories will reach some sort of agreement by early 2022. I think this, apart from the geopolitics of the Middle East, this is also very important for Joe Biden to have some significant diplomatic success, because okay, as far as the domestic economics is concerned, you can say it's been patchy. But there are areas where he's been able to build some consensus, related to some of his bills, especially related to infrastructure and all. Even though there has been opposition of the Republicans, but he's also been able to build consensus. On foreign policy, it's been very problematic. And as I said, now with the diminishing political capital, with the if you look at his approval ratings falling, it's going to be even tougher to build consensus with Republicans, especially over issues like Iran. So that is going to be the challenge. So something, I think, if you can have a sort of middle path, if you can have an incremental approach where both sides agree to a couple of conditions and then move ahead, I think that would be the ideal situation.
You just said that Joe Biden is not in the position to really assure that there will be no US withdrawal from the deal. So apart from the fact apart from the lack of political capital, like you mentioned, what else do you think is the key reason behind the this uncertainty or ambiguity behind Joe Biden's assurance, or Joe Biden's commitment?
Pressure from Israel.
Okay.
Also, even though the ties between Saudi Arabia and UAE, as we have been discussing earlier, that they've improved with Iran, but there is not total sort of support for the deal in its current form. There are apprehensions about Iran's nuclear program, and even, I mean, Saudi Arabia is trying to come up with its own nuclear program. That's what certain US assessments show. So I think it's a geopolitical rivalries within the Middle East, and obviously a very strong pressure from Israel. So Israel is opposing the nuclear deal, and the other worry is also that in case even if some progress is made, some significant steps are taken towards moving back towards a 2050 sort of agreement, Israel could up the ante vis-a-vis Iran. So in that situation, then there are very few options left for Biden. And in any case, within the Democrats also, he's the sort of quintessential establishment man. He's a centrist. So he wouldn't really want to take in the sphere of foreign policy. He wouldn't even want to annoy the Republicans too much, because there'll be areas where you'll need their support as well.
Right. Speaking of Biden needing Republicans, so White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki mentioned that Joe Biden will be addressing the last year U.S. Capitol riot today, or its anniversary. So, what do you think that Biden's address will be focusing on in this on the U.S. Capitol?
Obviously, politically, he will not miss the opportunity to sort of attack the Republicans more than the Republicans to have a go at his predecessor. That's the first thing. The second is also, obviously, one of the ramifications of this event was that countries, which are not democracies, they sort of said that this is eventually every democracy faces a sort of situation, there's chaos and whatever. And I think especially for countries like China, for instance, even for Russia, it was a godsend, because what they actually said was that, this is what the US sermonizes other countries, and this is the state of US democracy itself, it's in decline. And obviously there was a question mark on democracy itself, right?
Yeah.
So now what Biden has been trying to do, which Trump didn't, was that, Trump essentially got along very well with autocrats. In fact, he even couple of times even joked that I wish, that like Xi Jinping, that he could be president for life. And initially he got along very, even he had made references to some other countries which had very strict sort of rules on certain issues. And he said that, he wished he could do the same in the US. So, and even on issues like globalization and all, he was not really providing, obviously, it's not just liberal, but even if you look at the tendencies, you can't say that he was really a Democrat. Now it's a democratic rather. It is essentially, it's the US media sections of civil society which kept the pressure on him. But so his tendencies were very clear. Now Biden has been trying to project himself very differently. Because one thing where Trump, for instance, faltered was that he didn't take the allies into confidence, be it in Western Europe, be it in Asia. If you look at even ties with Japan and South Korea, so tariffs, they came into the way. Then the issue about security, that how much responsibility should the US be taking, say, with regards to NATO or with regards to security of Japan, of South Korea, and all that. And then even on the issue of North Korea, for instance, Japan and South Korea were uncomfortable with Trump's approach because he just wanted that he should, through his personal chemistry, should resolve the issue. Biden, on the other hand, has been saying that, he wants to take the allies into confidence. Now, as far as the symbolism is concerned, there's no doubt that, for whatever, whether it's the alternative to the BRI, that's triple BW, whether it is other Indo-Pacific, taking on China, coming up with having certain, if you look at economic relations also with countries, he's trying to send out a signal that, democracy should work together.
What do you think are the changes in travel regulations that have taken place? Like in the country, India has imposed a lot of rules, and mostly we know about the Indians. Why don't you tell our viewers what are the travel regulations in the major countries that have changed in the past few weeks?
You see, it's basically the problem in this issue is that, trajectory, as you would know, each time the trajectory of the pandemic is different. If you look at the peak, each country peaks at a different point of time. So if you look at the second wave, for instance, the US at that point of time was doing, when we had the second wave last year, the US was doing better because the vaccination rate was picking up. And obviously, as I said earlier, Biden had received credit for that. At this point of time, some countries, they have cases, but obviously much lesser than other countries. So for instance, if you look at the Southeast Asia, Singapore has managed to get a significant percentage of its population vaccinated, but cases are coming up again and again. Now, the problem is that obviously, first, the time period of the peak is very different. You can't sort of expect it, for instance, in South Asia, in this region itself, that India is going to peak, that Omicron will peak at the same time. In Bangladesh, it'll at different time periods. In Sri Lanka, the time period will be different. So that's the first thing. The second is obviously, what is your benchmark as far as vaccination is concerned? Because the question which is being raised at this point of time is that soon many countries will consider only those the booster as fully vaccinated, right? So that even countries like UAE, for instance, right? Now, and the other interesting thing is now, as once the expo ends, then again the UAE is also going to increase its restrictions. Already, I think vis-a-vis India, you see some they made their regulations quite strict. So there's no one size fits all, but I think basically if you break it down, each country is obviously has to see, for each country, especially you look at Southeast Asia, if you look at even Western Europe, tourism contributes significantly to their economies, right? So you somehow there are different models, like we discussed last week also, that you could have a model like Thailand, that you keep 3 cities open where the large percentage is vaccinated, 1 or 2 cities you can keep open, right? The other is when it really peaks, when there's pressure, when there's hospitalization, you actually close your borders except for essential travel, family members, or students or things like that. That's what's going to be there. But so far you don't see that. I mean, because the broad trend which is coming up so far is that it is not that severe in terms of hospitalization. But yes, I do see certain countries, for instance, in India itself, if you look at it state-wise, even domestic travel also there are curbs. US also, if you look at different states are following different policies. So in the bigger countries, you're going to have a state-wise sort of, each state will have its own sort of set of policies. And even what is also interesting is that we're talking about countries having a different trajectory. In certain countries, even each states will have different trajectories also. So, Kerala, for instance, the number of cases has really not gone down. But earlier, the mortality was relatively less. So it was less of a worry. So the mortality percentage is also important. But I broadly don't think that you can really now come up with very drastic measures for very long. I think the only way out is now first certain. It's too early to make this requirement of a booster mandatory, but the double vaccination plus an RT-PCR, because the other thing which is also related to travel and which obviously you have to bear in mind that a lot of so for instance WHO and a lot of other organizations are saying that having when if in Africa such a low percentage of vaccination you've got, and on the other hand you're talking about a third booster and a fourth booster, and also for how long are you going to have this sort of discrimination against certain countries. So I think that is what also prompted the US to open travel for for travelers from South Africa and all that. So as yet, I think India would be a very good indicator because when you look at UK and US, it was a bit confusing in the beginning because you had both Omicron and you had Delta. So now, once you see the peak, once you see the number of cases rising, and how much impact does it have on the healthcare system, you get a better idea. And then accordingly, the approach towards travel will be
because
determined.
US is facing a large number of daily COVID cases. Like it crossed 1 million, I think, a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
But they are still saying that it's still under control because of the hospitalizations are still under control. They're still claiming it to be that way.
Yes, so I think basically a lot of countries in the West, especially, they're hoping that, like in the UK, that most of the cases are Omicron now. So it was even the number of cases rose. Once you had more Omicron cases, the hospitalization reduced. So I think it's going to be that sort of debate, and it also the travel regulations also depend upon the leadership characteristic and the priorities. Certain leaders would not want to close down the economy at all. Whereas there will be others from time to time will need to make the changes. But again, I mean, basically, it's the basics which you need to get right. At least then, in that, if you've got your basics right, and in terms of vaccination, in terms of basic precautions, at least if you forget the statistics, at least the pressure on the healthcare system is less. And when the pressure is less, the economies can move. And if an economy has to move ahead, obviously travel is essential. So, and you could also, I mean, obviously, even within, as I said, within countries also you need to come up with innovative ways. You could even have certain states for some time, for instance, putting a restriction on travelers, say from Delhi and that's happening already. Right. So you're going to see that sort of thing. And internationally, again, you'll see the same. But I don't think very many countries now can afford to sort of put blanket bans. I think the only way out now is imposing these conditions. And I think as people are saying,
sporadic bans.
Yes,
like
absolutely. Sporadic, and then so for instance, today the only thing could be that okay, today full vaccination is the 2 doses. 5-6 months down the line, you will ultimately have to. But globally, that is going to be a big problem. However, in Africa, where even the single dose, the percentage of single doses is very low. How are you going to do that? So I think it's you ultimately get back to the root cause only, that back to the basics, a simple approach, and you also need a global consensus on these issues, because obviously what happens is once you're out, so for instance, if you're on a red list, while you're there on that red list, you raise this issue.
Right.
It's very unfair and whatever. Once you're out, you stop. So, but I think the developing countries also need to be on the same page. I think, so for instance, Africa and other developing countries need to start working together, and all, because tomorrow these travel bans will hit the developed world. Essentially is going to take a similar stand vis-a-vis all developing countries. Of course, it depends upon how, the number of tourists, how much they come and spend and things like that. It's very complicated, but I think we're getting a better picture now generally of how at least you can actually find some sort of arrangement where you don't need to keep everything open, but you don't need to close
shut
it down.
everything down either. Yeah.
Yes,
oh.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today.